The Online Business Exchange was a two-day live event presented by the Business School at the Open University. During the event, there was live chat and forum discussions. The live chat is now closed, but we hope you enjoy the video that follows. Hi and welcome back to the Online Business Exchange. Well, in this session we're going to be tackling supply chain management, and I'm joined by Rob Moore and Bjorn Klaus. Welcome to the studio. And we're going to be spending the next hour discussing some of these issues in two parts. Firstly, we're going to look at some of the underlying changes in society that are driving changes in supply management. And then we're going to have a little think about what the supply chain of the future will look like. Now, you'll see if you are in the Watch and Engage section of the website, which we hope you are, that there are some widgets or interactive tools that have come up on your screen. Now, you can select those by clicking on them, and we'd like to know your thoughts. Which areas of supply chain management does your business need to develop? And the other question is, what will the supply chain look like 20 years from now? So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. You can also put your thoughts and any questions, indeed, in the chat box, or you can send them to us on Twitter. The hashtag is OU_exchange. This is an interactive discussion, and we really do value your contribution during this session. OK, so Rob and Bjorn. We have a huge range of issues, and in fact the digital landscape is changing so quickly, so dramatically. We've heard from people earlier saying, when I did my MBA, I wasn't really looking at the digital economy, and we've talked a little bit about some of the MOOCs, in particular the supply chain management MOOC, that may be useful for people to gen up on some of this knowledge that's really having an impact. But we've got increased urbanisation, ageing population, spread of wealth, impact of consumer technology, service demands. Health and well-being is so much more important. There's a concern about sustainability, natural resources and their, availability, regulatory pressure as well, adaptation of the supply chain technology capabilities, and the impact of the next generation. So all of this is having a massive impact on what the supply chain looks like. So this session is all about the future. So could you tell us then, what are some of the most important issues in terms of what's driving these changes to that supply chain and how people should adapt and manage that?
Okay, well, if we take the first one, the ageing population, it's a nice problem to have, that people are living longer and they're healthier into older age. It also means that their demands are changing. Yeah. So people have got more free time, tend to have more disposable income. Yeah. So this is going to drive some of the things they buy, some of the things they interact with. Right. And this is also linked into the issue of health and well-being. Yeah. People are more concerned about how well they will feel as they get older, how mobile they are. So all of these are putting a changing pressure on how the supply chain works, the types of products and services that they want. So that's going to have a natural impact, and organisations that want to thrive will need to take account of the fact that their end consumers are actually changing, the demographics changing, and have to change their supply chains to meet those needs as well.
So some of this then, we've spoken about various types of ways of being. Older people are becoming more au fait with digital technologies. They are buying things online. And the supply chain, I appreciate yesterday you made a very convincing argument that the supply chain is wider and it interconnects with areas around finance, sales, marketing, brands, etc. So there is, there are these various other pressures that are impacting on that. But specifically in terms of the traditional concept of the supply chain, where we're seeing, goods being produced and delivered to end users, how is increased urbanisation and the ageing population impacting on that actual supply chain?
I think you refer to very, very different things there. Yeah. So the aging population, I think the aging population, how it changes the supply chain is in what they consume, yeah, and how you promote and deliver it to them. Yeah. I think if I compare the elderly side of the population, they use technology in a complete different way as my kids would do. And I think that makes that business for businesses incredibly difficult. It's almost like they have to almost speak two different languages, yeah, but they will have to adapt. And then this issue of urbanization. That's a fantastically interesting different point. But yeah, it's very different because it is a fact that cities are growing and growing and growing. And that means denser traffic. That means more pollution. That means, and companies will have to respond to that. So they will have to find different ways of delivering the goods that have been ordered to their customers, and that could be done in different shapes or different forms of transport, or really in different types of products, and not the physical book anymore, but the digital book, because the digital book doesn't have to be delivered to the store and from the store to the customer. So that is changing the supply chain. But if you just look at these things, and these were only two of the long list that you mentioned, they are putting in enormous pressure on companies. How do I serve that? Because it's not only how do I deliver it in this increasingly urbanized area, it's also how do I serve these two different kind of almost subsections of the population that consume in very, very different ways. And there you only talk about the extremes, about the elderly and the youth. And there's our generation in between. And we have, again, increasing demands on our time, increasing demands on the restrictions that we have in driving here, the cost of transport, the pressures of the economy weighing upon us. So we again have, as compared to the elderly and the youth, a complete other consumer profile. And you will have to fit it in, and you will have to make it work. And a digital supply chain offers fantastic opportunities there.
We've been talking about this whole idea of understanding customers and market segmentation, and I guess this is partly what you're referring to, is how important these different groups both consume and behave, and how then the supply chain needs to be able to adapt, which is very, very, I guess, complex, and one would have to be very dynamic. Can you give us some examples then about how that might actually be in business, how the way that people are consuming these different market segments, people are using supply chains to actually, well, to their advantage?
Well, it's the example, we talked about it before, and there's this example of Amazon in the drop-off point.
So one of the challenges that we have is actually getting your goods to your consumers, and home delivery absolutely, it's grown phenomenally over the last few years, and there's not a day goes by where there isn't a delivery truck outside my house dropping something off. But not everybody's at home, and it's actually not that environmentally friendly to drive around and drop off one parcel every time. So what we're starting to see is more use of these drop-off points. So a lot of the parcel services use local post offices, local shops. We're starting to see Argos is being used by Amazon quite a lot as a place to go and collect your goods from, which means you don't have to stay at home and you don't have to wait for people to turn up. And something that's starting to take off as well are things like the Amazon drop-off points, the lockers. So if you go to a railway station now, you might see one of the big yellow lockers.
I've seen them, and I've selected them in the past. And it's always interesting, I find, as a consumer, because they'll say, do you want this sent to your home, or do you want to collect it from, they say, outside Argos in my local area, and I've seen the big things. And sometimes I think, well, it's the same price here. So, you know, to what extent then, as a consumer, am I being encouraged to effectively cut short that supply chain, because I know it'll be more cost-effective and possibly environmentally friendly for people to deliver it in one bulk place, but it means then for me a longer trip.
But you'll make the choice based on convenience for you. What's more convenient, to go to your local Argos or railway station and pick it up, or to wait in the house for something that's going to be delivered?
Until it's being redelivered. How often does it happen that you wait desperately for something, and just as you're going out to pick up your kids, the delivery is there, you get the note in the letterbox, you were not home, we will deliver it next day. And you were desperately waiting for whatever you were waiting for.
But this is a very interesting issue, because the supply chain, I guess, is shifting a lot in terms of what is acceptable. Because I actually persuade most of the delivery drivers to leave it around the log shed in the back. So, you know, some people you can have arrangements. For example, I had a tracking device the other day where someone said, your driver John is delivering something. And I could look on the map and I could see where John was. He was coming down the road, and I could say, oh, I won't go out, I'll wait for John to come in. I had a photograph of him and everything. So that supply chain is becoming very real to me as an end user.
I think the supply chain needs to more and more accommodate to our needs in our lives. And that makes it so difficult, but that's why the technology and the digitization of this comes in so fantastically. Because what they want to try to, they want to serve you on one hand, they want to deliver when you are home, but they have a very selfish interest in that, because they don't want to make the trip 2 times. So if they somehow can make it work, and one of the examples that you give is that let you know when they are on their way, who's coming, that you make sure that you're home.
Yeah.
But if you can't be there, then maybe the train station, if you take a train to work every day anyway, rather than wait for the book or whatever is to arrive at your place, to come to your place, you know that you pass by that point, I'll pick it up, and it is no extra effort. Yeah. And then all of a sudden that cost element that you mentioned before isn't so much of an issue anymore.
Yeah.
But it's really on the part of those who run that supply chain is how can we accommodate it to increase customer service. And that is important because the supply is, you can, for every product that you want to buy, there is hundreds of suppliers these days. And so the one who gains in the market is the one who best serves their customers. So from that perspective, it's very, very important. But it's also very important from their own economics. Every wasted trip costs money. And somebody will have to pay it. And there's only one who will pay it, and that's you in the end. So if they want to compete on low prices and high customer service, they need to keep you pleased, and they need to keep the cost down. And that in this new world in this new digitized world, there are more opportunities to do that. But you need to understand how it works, and you need to understand what your profile is, and you need to understand what the characteristics of the products are.
So companies are offering these various different, I guess, delivery options to look at the very end of that supply chain. For consumers, based on this market segmentation, they need to understand who these customers are. They need to offer a range of options, basically, that would fit in with people's individual needs. Yet we've spoken, and I'm aware that this sort of touches on marketing, about the level of personalisation. And I thought this particular delivery company that had this driver, John, and I could see his picture, it was a lovely example of a personalisation that I felt was very appropriate for me as a consumer. Can you tell us then how companies are using some of this digital economy to make the most of things like personalisation in that supply chain?
If you look at the courier companies, they sell that app that you get. They sell it as an unique selling point. Look, we do not deliver. We engage with you to get you served, and that's a whole different way. So I think that's Amazon and the likes. They sell the fact that they accommodate to your needs and to your lifestyle to make their business model work. Because Amazon still suffers the fact that you cannot go and feel and touch the product. And so they have to excel in other ways. They have to say, well, look, maybe you cannot go into the shop and feel and touch and smell the product. But it is a very convenient way of buying. And we go to that more and more. Because less and less we do need to touch, feel, smell the product. I'm still an older generation, but I see my neighbors, they buy their milk, their butter, their vegetables online. And it's an enormously growing business. And that is how often you see the Ocados and the Tesco little trucks driving to the neighborhood. They've already made that switch, which I'm still trailing in. Of they trust that the milk is the right milk, and that the aubergine that you buy is an aubergine that looks nice and is fresh and things like that. And that's an enormous change. The interesting thing is that it's not just at consumer level that happens, but it happens throughout the supply chain. So if I'm a raw material supplier, really high up the supply chain, I need to think in what my customer, how it fits into their business model, how it fits into their production process, how it fits into their storage opportunities and their timing. And it goes even further. Me, the raw material supplier, not only need to think in my customers, in my direct customer, I need to think in terms of my customer's customer and my customer's customer's customer, etc. And somehow that needs to work both ways. And so me, the consumer, and that is where it becomes even more fascinating. If we talk, for example, to issues about sustainability, of course I want to be sustainable, and I don't want to do buy products that are unfriendly to the environment. But I need to change my behavior for that. And I need to understand that if I buy an ethical product, and you talked about it yesterday with John Sinclair, right? If I need to pay more for that product, but provided that I understand what I'm paying for, I would be unwilling to buy that product. And that paying for that is really understanding what my supplier's issues are, and what my supplier's issues are, my supplier's issues are. That clarity, that transparency, that is of crucial importance here, and that's why supply chain management is important, and that's why this transparency generated by the digital economy is so fascinating, because it allows us to do that.
But I think we're getting to that point now where the elements of the supply chain, as you've said, are so intertwined that you can't just worry about your own immediate customers or immediate suppliers, because every part is so dependent. The supply chain is so well timed that any part fails, the whole supply chain will fail. So it is this full understanding, and it's back to the word we used yesterday, partnerships. It's that understanding of what each part of the supply chain is doing. If I don't deliver this on time, what is the impact further down? Who will fail?
Well, it really is there. The supply chain is as strong as its weakest link.
Yeah.
That's just like the chain. If I'm that weakest link, then I increase the uncertainty and with that the cost for the entire supply chain. And what we said yesterday is that it is these days the supply chains that compete. It's not a company that competes against another company. It's that whole network that competes against that other whole network. And we need to make sure that we understand that in order not to be that weakest link.
There are so many other variables apart from just, goodwill and good business management. We've got, shifting economic power as well, and this whole global world that we're trading in, whereby there are different constraints and different, concepts, I guess, of what good business looks like. How is some of that impacting?
Well, I was thinking of the example of a couple of small items, engineering items to play with at home. And if I buy them from the UK, they cost a certain amount, but I know I can get them in 2 or 3 days. If I go on one of the trading sites, such as eBay or Alibaba, I can order it from the manufacturer for less than 20% I would pay in the UK, but it'll take several weeks to get here because it will be put onto a container ship and shipped across. So my question is, do I want it tomorrow? Or is it something that is of interest that when it gets here in 4 or 5 weeks is fine? But I've got the option. So it's the same item because the UK supplier buys from the manufacturers. The only difference is I can buy direct and it's the time lane. So am I willing to pay 5 times the price to get it immediately, or can I wait? But the interesting part about the supply chain is it gives me the choice. It's not the fact that I've only got the one choice. 5 years ago, I would only be able to go to a UK supplier and buy these items and pay the full price. Now I can choose to wait and have it delivered.
I think you can only do that when you really understand what's going on at a higher level. You mentioned these changing economic powers. If you see the rise of China, China before was relatively easy. It was our factory. They made what we consumed, and there was almost a one-way traffic. That's no longer the case. China is becoming almost a bigger market than we ourselves are. Yes. And so all of a sudden there is not a one-way traffic, there's a two-way traffic. And how does that impact on the cost of raw materials? I mean, we'll see that certain raw materials are just going up because China consumes an enormous amount. And they have worked hard and benefited from our drive for consumption, our need for consumption, and it is developed as a nation, and it's now almost as big as a consumer, or if not bigger a consumer than we are. That changes the facts, and that changes the supply chain, and that changes the goods and the information streams, and we need to be aware of that. Because when we operate in the supply chain, we being it could be a small UK business, I need to understand what's going on. I need to understand what is happening right now, and I need to understand where the trend's going. Because I need to make decisions about where do I source my goods from, do I make them or do I buy them? If I do buy them, do I source them from afar and cheap, or maybe do I just buy it from a local supplier? All these kind of things I need to take into consideration to make my own strategy to be able to compete in that increasingly competitive supply chain.
No, absolutely. I mean, we asked our audience at home, which areas of supply chain management they felt that their organisation needed to develop. And interestingly, 50% felt that it was more knowledge. We had 33% with more investment, 17% with better systems, nobody recognising people as part of that process. But knowledge, like you say, is a key concern for our audience out there. And if you aren't watching in the Watch and Engage option, you'll be able to participate in widgets and also chat by going back through the website and selecting that option also. So what would you make of this more knowledge? People are craving knowledge about the supply chain. And as you say, it's very, very important to understand these processes. How might people go about doing that? And where is the future of how transparent that knowledge should or could be?
Look, I think the transparency is already there. It is virtually impossible to keep an innovation unique unto yourself. What I make today, my competitors will make tomorrow. It is the understanding that is in your own hand, right? Whether I understand the ways of the market and the ways of the supply chain, that is up to me. I need to go out and study. I need to go and experience and obtain obtain that experience and try out and do new things. Your example from Amazon before, we'll try out new things. Amazon is fortunately, because it's an fairly rich company and powerful company, they can try out new things. But we can all do that at our own level. You don't need to be in Amazon to try out new things. But just trying out things without the underlying knowledge is just, a bet. That's just the Las Vegas trip. What you need to do is kind of obtain the knowledge and understanding of how it works, and then the creativity and the guts almost to try new things. Because that's where your future lies in the end. It's in the risky business of trying to do things differently. And the examples are there, are multiple. Amazon is a good example. Dell at the time was a good example. Name all these big famous companies that made it big. Zara, the clothing retailer. They use technology and the digital economy to change their supply chain, and it made them one of the leading companies in this sector. And they weren't there at the beginning of clothes have been sold for centuries, for more than centuries we've been wearing clothes, right? So they by just looking at the opportunities, by using the digital economy in their advantage, they've become from a single shop in western Spain to this global company that basically sets the tone now, and everybody else has to follow, and that is just getting the understanding, getting the knowledge, and have the creativity and guts to try out new things.
Yeah.
But it's that knowledge of the individual parts we said about the chain. So that where you need to increase your knowledge, first of all, what is it that your customers really want? And we come back to your point about you like the fact that John's coming at a certain time, which is great for you. But other customers will want something different. So understand what is it that your customers really want and will value and will pay for. And also, your suppliers, where are they? Understanding their processes, understanding what their constraints are, what their challenges are. Because if your suppliers struggle, you will struggle. So it's having that understanding and the knowledge of all the different parts. You don't need to be able to produce what your suppliers produce, but you need to know what they're producing, when they're producing it, what their constraints are. If there are going to be any problems, the most important thing is to let your customers know that there'll be a delay. Everybody has delays, but what's unforgivable is to have a delay you're not aware of.
Yeah.
And it's being able to pass that information on.
Yeah. And in the next session, we're going to look very practically, and I'm very interested, like you were saying, the chain is only as strong as the weakest link within that. And I guess knowledge really relates to that, and an understanding of, firefighting when things might go wrong, and having checks in place to ensure that those weakest links are manageable as part of that chain, so it doesn't all collapse.
Look, I think we've come a long way over the last decades in understanding what is playing in the supply chain, what are the issues of the supply chain. And whilst there is no single model that this is how it works, we got a good understanding of what are the issues. But we still have a long way to go. I still continue to bump into people that say, well, I work for the NHS and therefore the supply chain is not important for me. And I normally remain without words. I just don't. The NHS is a supply chain organization with an incredible component of the digital supply chain. It's all about management of information, coordination of capacities and availabilities. This is what the digital supply chain is rules. It is just that a lot of people still think of supply chain management as the logistics function of decades past. The truck that brings the box from one door to the other door. And that we need to go to a greater realization that the supply chain is really what drives our business. And the digital component, that's what we argued yesterday, makes it much more complicated. There's a lot more possibilities out there, but it also offers a lot more opportunities.
Yeah.
And you can only capture those by having understanding of those, that you know how to deal with the threats and that you can really capitalize on the opportunities.
Yeah.
And so we've gone a long way, but there's still a long way to go.
There is a huge way to go, and I'd like to talk about the future. And we asked people at home what they thought the future of the supply chain management is. What will the supply chain management look like in 20 years from now? I'm not sure I could answer that, and I'd love to know your thoughts on that. If you click on the widget and fill in a few boxes. Some of the things, though, that spring to mind, we've been talking about the actual end delivery, the very end of the supply chain. Drones are a big new hot topic, I guess, in terms of how goods are delivered to consumers. And this is something that is really, really changing, in particular in a digital economy. A very different idea, I imagine, for somebody of an older generation compared to someone from a new generation. So there are different, maybe emotional connections and different demands for some of these things. How do you see this future, and in particular relating this to things like terrestrial drones?
Well, this is where we're starting to see some real trials taking place. We're starting to get cities that are signing up to be the first to allow these deliveries to take place. So again, Amazon is leading the way in certain areas of this, where parcels are actually being delivered from the centre to the customer directly. There are examples where a terrestrial drone is basically a little remote control car that's driving on the pavement. It's not flying at all. Might be more acceptable in some areas not to have things flying overhead, but it basically follows the pavement. So we're starting to, they're not widespread yet, they're in a trial area, but in 20 years' time, it won't be surprising to have a robot of some description arriving at the door with your parcels in.
I mean, the UK airspace is very tightly controlled as opposed to other places like Canada. So does that mean the UK might miss out? Are there then, local implications of some of this?
I think there are some certain parts of the world where it will be more acceptable and almost more cost effective. We look at the changes in mobile phone technology. Mobile phones have taken off where traditional landlines don't exist. So they won't be building traditional landlines and phone lines because mobile technology is there. And similarly with the flying drones, they'll be able to deliver to places that roads just can't go. So a long way to go. We need better technologies, better efficiencies in engines. But in 20 years' time, I think the reliability and the trusting them will grow enough that it won't be an unusual sight.
I think the ultimate goal is that you can basically make a phone call and say, Scotty, beam up my shopping, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what that would be the ultimate efficiency in supply chain. We're not quite there yet. And in the meantime, things like the drones would be in it. It's not the actual solution what the drones will be. It's the idea that goes behind it. And exactly as Rob says, look, if you live in the Canadian prairies or something, maybe the drone is actually the most efficient way because you don't need a driver, you're not locked by traffic and maybe it can be efficient. Would it work in central London? No, it wouldn't. Because there's this long list of factors that you mentioned.
Especially if you're organising big bottles of mineral water. I mean, we were talking about this yesterday, in terms of economical supply chains. But clearly there are implications in terms of what can be delivered.
I think what we need to do is kind of understand that we need to tailor the supply chain to the needs of whoever we are dealing with. And the needs of somebody in central London and the abilities of someone in central London are just simply different than somebody else who lives out in the middle of nowhere. Definitely. But they are equally interesting customers. And we need to find a solution that is both economical and beneficial and feasible. And the drone in central London, no, it wouldn't work. Maybe the drop-off point, in all its simplicity as compared to the drone, is much more efficient and much more cost-effective. And that is kind of how we are now designing the supply chain of your future. It will be a whole range of solutions to get this single bottle of water to the customer. And the companies who come up with a new, even better way of delivering that, they will win out. And I think that's where the companies, functions in the companies, where marketing needs to start working together with the supply chain, needs to start working together with research and development, to design a product that marketing can easily sell, but that flows through that supply chain with those particular characteristics really, really well. And that can be sold by the sales department at a price that is competitive. And somehow it is not, this is a function versus a function versus a function. Almost like we've organized this whole session that we talk one moment, we talk about marketing, another moment we talk about supply chain. We need to sit all around the table with all these different functions together and start thinking about what are the needs and the limitations of all these different functions. How can we make this work as an organization? And how can we make this work as an organization that is part of that much longer supply chain?
We asked people at home what they felt the future would look like in 20 years, and we're now going to show the top 10 answers to those. Things like developing economics, changing markets, bespoke, that's a key area we've been talking about, trust, service change, digitalisation, seamlessness, to name but a few, direct manufacturing, and increased complexity. So a lot of very diverse issues there. But I'm just thinking, in terms of what you're talking about, we've been talking about the interaction, I guess, between machine and human, and how important that human interaction is. And I'm very conscious that supply chain management, the goal is really to streamline a lot of this effectively so that we're seeing something which ultimately could be someone's fridge being stocked and populated with their levels of optimum consumption. I mean, manufacturers are working on this kind of thing, being delivered in whatever way, shape or form to consumers. In terms of supply chain management, that's brilliant, because I can imagine that those, complexities and various aspects of economics will be, nailed out so that we were at an optimum level. But what does that then say about us as humans and consumers and our levels of choice and our, abilities to interact and, I guess, change that supply chain? Is there a point at which it becomes optimised?
Well, I think you're talking there about, we're back to the knowledge element. And they've been talking about fridges that do your ordering for you for years. And for that to be a reality, what we would need to have is a consumer that has a relationship with a particular supplier, with a particular supermarket. And then what would happen is the supermarket would monitor the levels of your milk and various things. And you'd need an agreement that said, when it gets to this level, I'll need this ordering. Because what would then happen is the various ingredients, various food in your fridge, they would know when it's been used. Their suppliers, the shop suppliers would know when more needs to be ordered, and it would be delivered at an agreed time, which isn't that different to what we've been doing in manufacturing for years.
It's Kanban, right?
Absolutely. And it's a common practice where raw materials at a site are monitored by the supplier, who then decides what needs to be delivered and when, and there's just an agreement at the levels that they stay between. It's taking that manufacturing, that business aspect, and bringing it into the home. How comfortable people will be with Asda deciding when their milk's going to be delivered will be an interesting one, but it could... Yeah.
But if you think of it, it's already happening. If you look at the way we consume music, that's the way we consume music, right? We don't necessarily have to have the CD or whatever the medium is anymore. We just need to have it available when we want it, and how it gets to us, we don't mind. I was staggered some time ago that in my iTunes there was music that I didn't put there. And so somehow the supplier suggests now music, and I can listen to a bit, and then they hope that I can buy the rest.
Do you think we'll buy it in the future, though? Because I haven't bought music for years now.
We buy almost the right to listen to music that somehow should sustain that.
That's exactly
it. It's interesting what you said, because at the business level, it's already happening. It's just us as private people, personal people, we kind of struggle with that kind of that releasing that control.
Trust, isn't it? It's what our audience said, in terms of we, to some extent, will have these relationships effectively with our supply chain, whereby we can trust that it's acceptable for them to maybe suggest things.
It's partially just simply the culture. If you just look at the difference between the age groups, I'm still of the generation. I want this piece of music, and I want to have it on my hard disk in this subdirectory. Whereas most people they listen to the things like Spotify and things like that, and they just assume it to be there, and they don't really think about the few pennies that it costs to listen to the song.
Does it make you feel old, Bjorn?
Oh no, I mean, I find it fascinating, but I recognize that indeed I struggle to adapt to that, because I feel that I need to have this song on my computer, and I'm a child of my time. I mean, that's a reality, and I whilst I'll depend on the digital economy and for my work, I still am stuck to this. I need to have this folder with this music on my CD, on my computer, because otherwise I don't feel comfortable. And companies need to accommodate that.
It's that difference between the product and the service. We're becoming more comfortable with a service and renting a movie rather than buying the actual DVD. It'll be interesting to see in a few years' time the balance between DVDs sold in the shop compared to those that are rented and the various subscription services.
Well, we're going to have a quick break now because I know you can talk about supply chain management for hours, and indeed we will, but we're going to take a quick 5-minute break and then we're going to return where we're going to look at specific examples of large organisations that are using this and also small businesses also. So we're going to have a quick break. We'll see you again in 5 minutes to continue this conversation.